Nobody can. Yet when it comes to your money, you should understand.
Or no skin. Our inner feeling and proprioception, that's the way we encounter the real. But our understanding them as exactly merely being that is the next level, which is the vision from outside the cave. That's merely seeing things as they're projected, not as they truly are. Bringing that in from the outside of the cave is we can't expect a different form of sensing the world, but we can bring a different form of understanding it. That's the light from the sun, right? Okay. So what kind of escape is there from the fact that these are our senses, but we can bring all these layers of understanding, and we know we need necessarily many maps of the world. We need a wave map and a particle map. We need opposite maps, because any surface you're doing that isn't totally flat, you have to have a map for each section of it, right?
So David, let me stop you here because we're at the top of the hour, and we're gonna have a speaker. So if you can hold on those thoughts to after the lecture.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, okay.
And then David, very, very briefly, do you have a question or a comment or anything before we go to the speaker?
So
well, I agree with what
what would be a wrong model? That's my question.
Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say I agree with what the previous David was saying, that we were in the cave until science comes along, and through the use of tools that extend our senses and our knowledge base, we come to a better understanding of reality through science. I was just born here. I don't know what's going on. And then science, I think, is brilliant. It's the work of a lot of smart people chiseling away at the illusions until you get a pretty clear picture of physics. So that's what I think it's all about.
Fair enough. Sounds good. Thank you, David. All right. So we are recording now. Officially, the meeting has started. So I will give it to Howard and go ahead.
Thank you, Carl, for moderating, and thank you all for your interest. And I look forward to some stimulating conversation after my presentation. As brief background, I am a physician, I'm a scientist, and I'm a philosopher. I've been researching reality for over 50 years. And that's a strange thing to say, but it's true. I've been trying to understand how reality works and looking at it from many different scientific and philosophical lenses. Back in 2018, after half a century again of interest in this idea of understanding of reality, what's really happening again inside the cave, so to speak, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Suddenly, I had a revelation that the dots connected, and I suddenly saw a convergence of data, of logic. That's why I use the word revelation in part, because I think I saw it. And that's what I'm going to try and share with you here this evening. I've written this in much more detail in my new book, Dream It to Do It, Science and Magic. So some of what I'll be saying will be very condensed excerpts from that book. You will find this presentation extremely data dense. We're going to cover so many different subjects and give you a very different view and hopefully understanding of them than is the conventional belief system. We'll also have an opportunity to address some of the questions I already heard before we started here formally tonight. For example, can there not be a bridge between spirituality and science and so on? I'll be addressing questions of that nature. Coming back to the title of this presentation, The Allegory of the Cave, I learned about this in Plato's Republic back when I was just starting university many, many moons ago. And it stuck with me all these years. Kind of in the back, as I said, in 2018, the dots connected, things like this suddenly had a different whole level of meaning for me. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the Allegory of the Cave, let me just briefly review it with you. It's about a group of prisoners who've been chained to a wall of a dark cave for most of their lives. All they can see are occasional flickering shadows in front of them on the wall. One day, after many, many years of entrapment, one of the prisoners somehow escapes. He gradually crawls up towards the entrance of the cave, starting to see a bit of a very dim light in the distance, going closer and closer. until he reaches the opening of the cave, at which point he's blinded by the power of the sun because his eyes have been in the dark for decades. However, after a while, his eyes accommodate and he begins to see form, color, the beauty and variety of the outside world. And he decides he has to go back to the cave now, not because he wants to go into the cave, back to one of your questions earlier, but rather he wants to free remaining prisoners. When he comes back to the entrance of the cave, he again is confronted by a great change in the light and illumination level, this time the opposite way. Again, he's going from very bright to extreme darkness. So initially, he's totally blinded and he stumbles about. Yet he tries to call out to the other prisoners to say he's seen the light, so to speak, outside, he's free, and he's come to free them. But they're too afraid to listen to him, to follow him. So they remain as prisoners in the cave, not because of the material, the physical restraints, because of their fears and their false beliefs. So that's the allegory of the cave. It's about, yes, the difference between illusion and reality, and entrapment, particularly by fear. There have been many times in the history of mankind when we've literally believed in the wrong model of reality. This is not something just a matter of philosophical allegory or literature. For example, the belief way back in a flat earth, or the belief that the universe was centered around the earth, rather than the earth just being one of many planets around the sun and so on. I suggest that the current societal breakdown and the all too real, multiple and looming existential threats we're facing with right now are the consequences of another such time in believing literally in the wrong model of reality. In our current case, this is known as the materialistic reductionist paradigm. It's the belief and faith that there's an independently existing external world and that everything can only be explained in those physical terms. It's not just a hypothesis or a theory. For many, it's an unquestioned belief, and that's why I say it's a matter of faith. On the other hand, let's take a closer look at what is real. We thought until recently that we were privileged to live, especially in the Western countries, in the relative golden age of progress. We have all these magical technological wonders. We can connect to anyone all over the world. There's so many, so to speak, miracles that are just commonplace for us right now. But the reality is, we're not going into a golden age. We're going into a dystopian future of entropic decline. In physics, entropy is the breakdown of order. Let's start with society. The societal breakdown. Depression is one of the most serious causes of medical disability right now in the world. Loneliness, as some of you may know, has recently become an epidemic. The Surgeon General of the United States has actually addressed it as such. The governments of the UK and Japan have both appointed federal ministers of loneliness because of their concern. You know, too, in our world right now, there's so much divisiveness, there's so much anger. We see failing democracies, we see the dramas of war. This is societal breakdown. Ecologically, in terms of our environment, we have toxic pollution all over the world. There's nowhere in the world now even free of, for example, microplastics. Global climate change is not a theory. It's a dreadful reality, and it's irreversible. We're facing multiple species extinctions. And then a whole other level, existential threat. The doomsday clock is maintained by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, a group of eminent international scientists who follow, track various trends in the world that seem to have potentially very dangerous consequences, the worst being global catastrophe. they symbolically use the metaphor of a clock to represent how close we are or away from catastrophe, catastrophe being midnight. Currently, the doomsday clock is set at the unprecedented short interval of 90 seconds before midnight, before annihilation. These are not just my theories. I'm very quickly giving you some of the facts. Let's go deeper now into physics. Many think of physics as being the most solid of the sciences, the most ideal of the sciences, the most perfect perhaps of the sciences, and the most yielding of information, which has helped in our understanding and mastery of our world. Let's look at the research findings. The materialist reductionist paradigm of reality, which is the false belief in reality, as I said, that we currently believe and work with, is that the universe is something physical out there. We are not in control of it. We are part of everything that's out there, but only a very small part. And also, this universe is filled with independently existing entities, objects, substances, atomic particles. So that's the notion of the materialistic reductionist paradigm. But the research in physics itself is showing this is wrong. In physics, there's something now called non-locality, which means basically that although we used to think things were separate, like, for example, very small atomic particles, they're not really separate. They're entangled. Somehow, although we cannot explain it, their behavior, their characteristics are coordinated over great distances and at faster than light speeds. So there's some level of connection that we can understand. And then when people look for the ultimate building blocks of so-called atomic particles, they find there are fundamentally no atomic particles. Fundamentally, we have what we call probability waves or zones of probability. And here's the kicker. For us, or physicists, to be able to observe and measure these fundamental atomic particles that are in a zone of probability, we have to have some way of observing them, a human observer at some point. Even though there may be instruments involved, there still has to be human observation, which causes what they call the collapse of the wave or the condensation of the wave into something physicalistic. The physicist Wheeler, because of this, said we live in a participatory universe. So the universe is not out there independent of us. It's connected and dependent on us. I want to quote Max Planck, who was the founder of quantum mechanics. I regard consciousness as fundamental. Matter is derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness. There is no matter as such, end quote. Again, one of the most eminent physicists, and my book has dozens of physicists who are coming up with the same conclusion. But that's not the belief most people have. They believe, again, there's an independent physical reality out there. One of the other areas of science, not as well known, that also looks deeply at the question of what is reality, how does it work, is parapsychology, which basically is researching on mind over matter. In the parapsychological research experiments on things like telepathy, and precognition, and psychokinesis, there are no ways to block it. Distance doesn't matter. Faraday cages don't matter. Concrete bunkers don't matter, and certainly not distance. So most conventional scientists have, and still many do, dismiss parapsychological research as being impossible. Because if you can't block it, if you can't measure something that carries the information, how can that be possible? Well, it is possible. And even though it's not always treated respectfully at all by the scientific establishment or the popular media, contrary to what a lot of people know, for almost 25 years, the American intelligence and military community has funded a project called Stargate, which is a form of remote viewing research. It's a surveillance project. It provided actionable intelligence for over several hundred missions. It went on for almost 25 years, again, funded by both the military and the US intelligence forces. But the public doesn't know this. And then ongoing right now is the Global Consciousness Project. This tracks the impact of the simultaneous focused attention of millions of people worldwide during major global events on random physical measurement devices. Ongoing research for more than two decades is proving that large-scale group consciousness can affect the physical world. It's yielded results exceeding the 7 sigma level of odds against chance at more than 1 trillion to 1. These findings are much stronger than that in any other area of conventional science, even though they haven't been looked at because, again, of this belief in the wrong model of reality and the assumption this was impossible. Let's deconstruct another false belief we have, which is the prevailing one, both in the scientific community and popularly worldwide, and that is the relationship between our physical head brain and our consciousness. First of all, some of you may know, correlation is not the same as causation. The only evidence we have of the brain's relationship to our experience of consciousness and our ability to control and move things through our body, for example, is by correlation. We perhaps can measure symmetrical activity in the brain, and we can associate that with a movement of some part of the hand or sensation somewhere else in the body. That's a correlation, not the same as causation. In fact, there's no proof at all for how the physical brain can generate the subjective experience of consciousness. There's not even an accepted theory of that. After all these years, I repeat, there's no proof, none, that the physical brain produces consciousness, and yet it's just taken as belief, again back to faith, and the wrong model of reality. The philosopher David Chalmers refers to this as the hard problem. How do you explain how the physical brain generates consciousness? And it's been considered almost insolvable now for some years, and it's still referred to as the hard problem. I like the way New Age author Peter Russell flipped the argument, though. He said, how can something as immaterial as consciousness arise from something as unconscious as matter? Instead of being on the defensive, flipping it around. Research does reveal that the head brain functions more as a selective receiver transducer for consciousness, but is not the source of consciousness. So the hard problem is actually a pseudo problem. It's based on the false belief of a causal role for the material brain in consciousness, for which, again, there's no evidence or theory. So what can we know for certain about the true source of consciousness? Another quotation I'd like to bring to your attention is the butterfly dream from Master Chung Tzu from 4th century BC. Once upon a time, I dreamt I was flying as a butterfly. However, soon I awakened and was my familiar self again. Now, I do not know whether I was then a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or whether I am now a butterfly dreaming I am a man. So again, many, many years ago, many cultures were already struggling with this notion of reality and illusion. The example that I most like to bring to your attention, though, is that of the Vedic sage Shankara and his insight that the knower cannot know itself. Therefore, your ego, which you are aware of as your personality and your feelings, cannot be who you really are. I'm going to give you a thought experiment briefly to illustrate the truth of what I just said. When you think of yourself in situations where you're, for example, looking into your bathroom mirror, perhaps to adjust your hair or whatever, shave, makeup, whatever it might be, and you notice while you're doing whatever you're doing that it's your face and you recognize it, you've seen it for many years. It may not look as young or as rested all the time, but you recognize it. However, although you know that's your face you're looking at in the mirror, what you're looking at in the mirror is not you. It's something you're aware of. So again, back to Shankara, the knower cannot know itself. So everything that you know is somewhat external to you, objective. The only thing we can absolutely know to be true, the only thing, is that we're experiencing awareness of being aware as our present reality, whether that's in a dream or some altered state of consciousness. Again, the only thing we can be aware of, for sure, absolutely, is that we're experiencing awareness of being aware as our present reality. Nothing else, just that we're aware of being aware. Now, coming to imagination, in our culture, imagination is often dismissed as something wasteful. When children, for example, are daydreaming at school, they're told to stop it and pay attention. And increasingly, in our almost computer modeled civilization we're moving increasingly into, imagination is just something we farm out to others. The truth of imagination is it's the source of everything that we've ever discovered and invented. And I repeat that. Imagination is the source of everything that's ever been discovered and developed. The actual process of scientific discoveries and inventions is not the scientific method that many of us were taught. It's not through going through some algorithm from A to Z, trying various variable combinations until you prove or disprove a hypothesis. It's from imagination. It's from envisioning. Einstein, as many of you know, is considered one of the most famous physicists of modern times, scientist beyond even just physics. And he's famous for his mathematical formulations like E, mc square, and the whole notion of relativity. But Einstein began his research to study cosmology at the age of 16 by imagining riding on a beam of light through the universe, not through laboratory experiences and complex calculations. Nikola Tesla was the inventor who's still responsible, even though it's several decades ago, for most of our electrical infrastructure that we enjoy in the world today. He did all of his inventing in his mind, completely. He would create working models. He would turn them on and operate them as a simulation to see how well they functioned. Brilliant, brilliant inventions. As early as, sorry about that, as early as 1926, Tesla envisioned the cell phone. He described it as a shirt pocket device that would allow us to instantaneously be in contact anywhere in the world, both by audio and video. 1926, just from imagination. One of the other things that, again, we've been taught not to believe is that thoughts can become things. In medicine, we have something, as many of you know, called the placebo effect. If somebody really believes that a chemically inert substance will have a psychological, physiological effect on them, then often they will experience that effect, that benefit. On the other hand, if they have had difficulties with medications in terms of side effects, allergic reactions, and so on, they may be fearful, even though they don't know, of course, that it's inert. They still may be fearful this new substance will actually cause some problem for them, and they'll have negative side effects, and many of them do. Because again, the belief affects the physiology, not just the perception emotionally, actually what's going on in the body. At an even more dramatic level, we have epigenetics. Many of us have been taught and believe that we're the product of our genes from our parents, our mothers and fathers. And that the way you're wired genetically is, the way you will develop and be and live in terms of health and longevity and so on. But now we know there's epigenetics. The mind can affect, we call it gene expression, whether the genes, so to speak, are active or not active. So it's not just a question of whether you have the genes. Your mind can activate or deactivate them. And then, most fascinating, it's neuroplasticity. I've already explained to you and shown you some of the reasons that the brain, the physical brain, does not produce consciousness. But here's another interesting angle to look at another way of looking at this. In neuroplasticity, the way we think can actually change the wiring patterns of the brain. So again, it's not the brain producing consciousness. Consciousness is above and beyond the brain. So how does reality really work? The answer is partly from leading edge scientific discoveries of quantum mechanics. And it goes as follows. Physical reality is mere waves of infinite possibilities imagined and observed into materializations. Let's dive more deeply into how reality really works. We have maps of a different level of reality from many different sources. There's the mystical experiences from thousands of years ago that people still have today, the indigenous teachings from all over the world, psychedelic insights, and the perennial philosophy from Aldous Huxley. The perennial philosophy was a very interesting approach Huxley took to the world we live in, where there's so many different religions and there's so much suspicion, antagonism between them. He looked at it very differently, though. He looked at what's in common to all of the major religions. What's the common denominator? It's like looking at signal noise detection theory. If you have a poor signal, but if you keep repeating it, eventually you'll get a clear sense of what the real message is. So that was the approach he took with all these different religious texts from different traditions. He looked at what's in common, which again converges and shows you more of the signal. And this is what he came up with in part, just to summarize it. So from both the perennial philosophy, which was studying all of these religions, and the mystical experiences and indigenous teachings, psychedelic insights, all are convergent on this. Reality is multidimensional, and what we experience is only a superficial portion of the whole, where all is connected. The mystics refer to this as the oneness of the allness. The underlying reality for all of existence is universal consciousness, which some might call God. I think maybe a more appropriate term and more neutral right now would be source, the source. Our ego, our egoic sense of self, thou, blocks our connection with the deeper level of ultimate reality, of which we're just an extension. Basically, we're extended sensory organs for the underlying source. Let's dive deeper. Non-duality literally means not two. When we go back to the materialist reductionist paradigm of reality, if you recall, it's the belief there's an external, physical, independent reality out there, which means it's different and separate from ourselves. In non-duality, it's not just not two, everything is one. Again, oneness of the allness. And it's possible to engage what we call non-dual practices to experience our ability to work in more than one dimension, what I would call our amphibious nature. To some degree, it's going in and out of the cave, back to one of the earlier questioners. So for example, things like breath work, meditation, lucid dreaming, also known as dream yoga, the plant medicines and psychedelics, all of these allow normal people in the proper conditions, the proper instruction, to access this other level of reality. What's keeping us trapped in this cave of illusion? There are reasons why our real source identity is not more broadly known or experienced. Human minds have a fail-safe to protect the virtual reality cover from being exposed. This fail-safe is so convincing that we cannot wake up from it to realize the true nature of our existence. Several factors are fundamental in keeping us trapped. First, belief. We're programmed by our experiences to see reality through different lenses. And our beliefs then are like filters, blinding us from perceiving things differently. Let me give you a conventional example of that right now, a scary one. What's going on right now in the United States as the US elections approach for the next president? You have two, at least, very, very large blocks of the population. On one hand, having access to the same information, the same reality, and yet having a totally different perception. To the degree, as some of you know, that there's concern, just several months from now, the real possibility of civil war in the United States. These are powerful. They can be very destructive. Another factor keeping us trapped is distraction. We've become addicted to material possessions. And we're also victims of weaponized information overload. This obscures our connection to a greater world within ourselves. And then there's the ego. The untamed egoic self has a delusional and inflated sense of who and what it thinks it is. It emotionally hijacks our mind to compel us towards behaviors that are self-serving and short-sighted. It's constantly on the lookout for external rewards, an unrelenting need for still more and more to complete and validate its worth. So it keeps pulling away, going to separation as opposed to non-duality and connection. And then there's fear. Fear of going insane if you seriously entertain some of these things I'm talking about even now. And when some people, as some of you may know, take psychedelic drugs, they have bad trips. And some have even gone psychotic from such experiences. Or there may be the fear on a potential level, that if you really got out of the cave and experienced one of the illness, that in a way you'd also suddenly be all alone. There'd be no other individual human beings. And then perhaps the most important factor, and maybe a little more challenging to swallow, is the intrinsic design. Consciousness experience itself as both subject and object. There's an existential need for even such an omniscient and omnipotent universal mind to have things to be aware of. Consciousness is awareness, but in order to be aware, there must be something to be aware of. And there's also a need for novelty, which implies change and unexpected occurrences and unpredictability. Alan Watts, back to one of the other questions too, was a student of the Eastern Oriental religion, as well as a philosopher and a Christian minister. His book, the book on the taboo of knowing, it's called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. He describes this veiling of reality as a metaphorical game of God, of hide and seek. God, or the universal mind or source, shapeshifts into being you and I and all the people, animals, plants, and stars, so it can have entertaining adventures. It's done so well that it's hard to remember where and how it hid itself. Watts goes on to provide the mythical explanation of your relationship to the greater reality from the ancient Vedantic philosophy of India. Despite your amnesia, the world is looking at itself through your eyes. In conclusion, the evidence-based logical conclusion with the wisdom of Occam's razor is that the popularly accepted materialistic reductionist model of reality is false. Our consensual world, this level we experience now, is more like a virtual reality, dreamlike state that we unknowingly created. And our notion of being separate selves is an illusion, just like the other apparent characters populating our nightly dreams. We are existing in a participatory universe. We are the created and the creator. And the underlying field of consciousness exists and manifests through our own experiences in our everyday lives. We are a way for the universe to experience itself. As in the words of Teilhard de Chardin, the Catholic priest, philosopher, and paleontologist, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. As it's put in the Bible, it's about being in this world, but that doesn't mean we're of this world. In my book, as I was mentioning, sharing some excerpt with you right now, in addition to expanding on this evidence for how reality really works, I also actually provide experiential exercises that within a few minutes allow you to start shifting reality. So it's not theory, it's no matter if you believe it or understand logic. I actually have developed a formula that you can experience the reality of it yourselves within minutes. That concludes my formal presentation. I know there's a lot of information here, and I look forward to stimulating discussion. Thank you.
Wow. Yes. Thank you, Howard. yeah, this is going to require multiple viewings, I think, because every single statement probably will go, wow, mind blown. Oh, is this true? Let's explore further. So at least that's what was going on through my head. And if the chat is any indication, the chat has been probably one of the busiest I've ever seen. So that's also going to probably involve, what I would recommend if anybody can do that is actually save the chat before you log off, because I don't think that's going to be uploaded to YouTube, unlike the video. And there's a lot of comments there. So thanks again, Howard. We're going to take questions and comments, because this is the kind of topics that people can talk for hours about. I am going to have a timer, a 3-minute timer for every person. So try to keep it under that time. If you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand, as Hunter just did. If you posted any kind of comment that probably was interesting, feel free to raise your hand and actually read it and ask the question. If you actually do not want to speak or be on camera, please write down on the chat that you would like me to read it instead, if that's what you want. Okay, so we'll go with Hunter. Go ahead, Hunter.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Howard. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
You made reference to the studies that have found correlations between things people are paying attention to and mass events in the world. Some exercise you might have that we could observe for ourselves. That sounds extremely interesting. One question I have is, how far in theory do you think we can take these sorts of effects? Because, we're not at the point where they're solving the energy crisis or doing anything like that. So where could they theoretically end up? And what is missing that we don't have yet to get to that point?
Your question is partly, I think, premised on us needing more information out there. And what I'm suggesting, and I know there's so much in this book too, is the most information-dense book I think ever written. When I go back to that word source, or again, what people would have called historically perhaps God, or term I use in my book is universal mind, it's the source of everything. There is nothing missing. Everything. And because we're an extension, a projection of source, when we understand how to reconnect, and going back to what I said, the non-dual practice, I went through it quickly, we have access to whatever we want to know. I only gave you just obviously a small example of the scientists who've worked with imagination and intuition, but almost all the major discoveries that many of us take for granted, even those that seem so sophisticated and complex, they came from imagination. For example, there's something called the periodic table of elements, which explains the atomic structure of everything and the molecules, and supposedly the building blocks in a very sophisticated way. And it was developed by a scientist named Mendeleev, who was trying to figure out some mathematical arrangement that they could all be on a table and seem to like consecutively fit in and a pattern and sort, even though they're different. And he couldn't figure it out. And one night he just was exhausted and he had a dream. And in his dream, it populated. And what he came up with, back again, partly to your question, wasn't just how to explain the underlying structure of the different elements and molecules and explain how they relate to each other. He even could predict one's elements that weren't yet discovered and say where they'd fit on the chart from his imagination. So I know we're not taught this, but it's all there when you learn how to access it. One of the concerns I have, just as an aside right now, is because of cell phone technology, smartphone technology, we're increasingly dependent to the point I'd say we're addicted to thinking all the important stuff's out there. And again, that's back to the cave. No, those are shadows on the wall. I mean, we know, even going back to, for example, what's going on right now in social media, the internet, there's so much fake news. There's so much exploitation. There really is a weaponization. They really hire psychiatrists and psychologists to tell them how to make the software addictive, how to hook people more. So it's not really just this wonderful library out there that's free. We're actually, in some ways, the product they use to sell information to make money themselves from other advertisers and so on. So again, it's from within. It's not that we have to fundamentally find out more scientifically in physics or in any other area. That's not where the solution is. The reason I said, coming back to the ecological crisis, is because we think it is all about what's out here. We have it so wrong. The indigenous cultures, which coexisted with nature successfully for thousands of years, unlike us, maxing out at a couple of centuries, they had a relationship with the land and the animals. I don't mean they just, didn't destroy them the way we might. I mean, they honored them. It was part of the living presence, again, that because everything came from source. I hope this is not too esoteric for you, the way I'm saying it.
No, not at all.
Good.
Thank you.
If I'm following, you're saying something like the solutions to the energy or the climate crisis or whatever it might be are to be found in imagination. The fact that we haven't found them yet is partially because we're not looking in the right place, because we don't believe that's where the solutions are to be found.
Yes, and also we're so distracted looking out there for our information. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Hunter, for the question. I posted a link to Howard's book on Amazon. I hope that's okay, Howard. But if you
Yes,
have
thank you.
a link that you want to direct to your own website or any other resource, feel free to post it on the chat. David, go ahead.
I guess in 3 minutes I can ask 2 questions. I don't know which one you want to answer. You say imagination is the source of everything we've ever invented and stuff like that. I'm not sure why we're thinking imagination is deprecated nowadays or what, in maybe industrial school style teaching. We were visualizing people forced to memorize a great deal, not be imaginative. But as far as philosophical understanding of the world, like I'm going back to 1750s with Immanuel Kant, experience is the result of imagination. Imagination is the presupposed necessary part of mind that you must be able to do in order to even have what we call experience. So, it's what experience is built of. So I don't know that we, philosophically have ignored imagination. And that's the first thing. I'm not sure if you're in a different paradigm than that. Second, and this is maybe the more general question about your presentation, let's call that ultimate single real thing. What Spinoza will call God, or what you're calling, I think, ultimate mind. I'm not sure why the term mind. If that thing is essentially chaotic and complex and completely interconnected, and this a massive entirety, our understanding as humans is mere simplification and reduction. So in what sense do you feel we can say we can understand everything and reality if it's beyond this kind of reduction in its own essential, structure as what it is? Human understanding being very limited. Like try to compare 7 things here. We're out of our league. 3 dimensions. Even the way things permute in 3 dimensions is, what do you call it, non-commutative groups. This is like mathematically difficult already with only 3. So what are we talking about, this ultimate, and call it a mind that, in what sense do you imagine that the human beings, reach there compared to what AI could reach? And,
David, can I cut you off now because you're raising so many points? I want to try to remember and be able to speak to them. Is that right?
That's the question. It's like, yeah, human understanding and the access to this ultimate, it's still duality there, right? Ours is reduced understanding from that, right?
Again, you're raising a lot of different things. You only have so much time, obviously. First of all, you question why I think imagination, has been ignored or suppressed as being important. Again, I don't have time to go into it in detail, but if you told most people who don't know this background that almost all the major scientific inventions just came through dreams, you would not be believed. Most people think, no, that's not how they come up with these inventions and discoveries at all. But it is in dreams. Secondly, you ask why I used the word, mind or universal mind. That's the word I used in my book. But I think I said earlier, I now prefer the word source. I think that's a more accurate and less loaded term. You also, raised the question of how insightful can you really become to understand the real nature of reality? And one example I will give you of that question or concern is what happens for some people in proper conditions when they take psychedelic medicines. Many of them had a totally life-changing experience that affected their lives in a positive way for decades to come. Another thing which is not known about modern scientific discovery, and particularly what's going on right now in Silicon Valley, is how many of these scientists used LSD for their discoveries. So I'm going to repeat, we're given a total misrepresentation of how science and invention comes about because it's based on the wrong belief system of where the real information comes from in the first place.
You're on mute, David.
Right, sorry. So they're using psychedelics to overcome their presuppositions, which they can't do just by a mental discipline. They have to do it that way as opposed to meditating or something else. Okay, makes sense. Seems like take a pill to get smarter, but I always find that a little upsetting.
Which we already know about, right? Like nootropics
Mhm.
and mushrooms and all that stuff. That's all that stuff is not new, yeah.
Or listen to music. It's all the same.
Yeah. DLJ, your hand is up.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thought-provoking presentation. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think I stumbled a bit. I got stuck somewhere and I might have missed a bit. So sorry if I'm asking you to repeat yourself. It was about universal mind, and you just mentioned that you are thinking in terms of source now, right? So my question was going to be, you're not thinking, well, I'll rephrase it. So you're obviously not thinking of universal mind in the Durkheim sense of collective consciousness, which he warned us not to metastasize as a thing, right?
Mhm.
So you're not doing that one, good. and presumably you're not arguing for a mind as navigation, so like the universe having a navigation system and therefore monitoring and tracking it, right? Okay, good. Thank you. That was going to be my question. Which of those? But it isn't. So it's source. What could you just elaborate a little bit more on source? What do you mean by source as universal mind?
I'll use an analogy if I could to humans when we dream. And I'll start with when we have daydreams. If we're in situations where we become bored, many of us just naturally drift off in our minds if we can't do anything physically necessarily or go somewhere else at the time, and we daydream. And some of us also purposely choose to daydream for various reasons. The new car we fancy, somebody we're attracted to, whatever it might be. But it's just coming out of, again, our imagination. And we do that for our entertainment. And going back to Alan Watts and his suggestion again that source is playing this extremely complicated game of hide and seek, pretending to be other people within the dream, which is coming from itself. So when we have dreams as humans, in many cases, of course, there seem to be other independent people in our dreams. Seems to be. And we interact with them, sometimes physically or just in communication, but they're just out of our imagination. So symbolically, when we as humans are in our dreaming state, it's somewhat analogous to what's going on with source. For both the same reason, and in some ways, a similar mechanism of it happening.
Okay, so I think I'm not sure the word. So I'm not sure about where the word source comes into this. You're saying there's universal in the sense of common. It's common to all of us. Therefore, we all dream. Dogs dream, presumably, but not all organisms dream. So
Again, in this
source.
notion,
Stuck on it.
in this notion again, everything comes from source. So all humans, all creatures, even inanimate things, all parts of the universe, everything. Again, when you have a dream, you're dreaming of something. and that something's coming out of your imagination. Yet when you're in that dream, for many of the times, it seems totally real, totally independent of us. But it's just delusion. It's just coming out of our dream. And so in a sense, source is a divine dreamer.
Divine dreamer. Okay, I think I'm actually more lost, but I appreciate your comments.
Sorry.
I'll come round again.
Well, one other thing I'll just say that may be of interest to you, and I'll say there's on our call tonight too. On my own website, I have about 20 deep podcast interviews about the book it's all free. That goes into this a lot more detail.
Right. Yeah. Please make sure to put your website address on the chat, Howard. Thank you. David R., go ahead. You're next.
Hey. Okay, yeah, dream it to do it. Yeah, this is sort of the power of positive thinking, which I agree with. And I think probably your interpersonal skills, Howard, are excellent for your patients and for therapy. As far as your physics, I don't know where to start, but you didn't explain that the brain doesn't produce consciousness. You just stated it. And if the brain doesn't produce consciousness, where does consciousness come from? You talk about this source. Imagination's all over the map. The way we constrain imagination to reality is through science. I can imagine a unicorn governing the universe, but is that realistic? Fortunately, I've been able to read science, which these smart people through history, or at least in the last few hundred years, have come up with, like Newton and Einstein, to constrain my wild imagination to more or less realistic model of reality. So I just, I guess that's all I have to. The universe is certainly not dependent on us. It was here. Einstein said this. The universe didn't need us to exist. It was existing long before we came along. Now you might argue this source existed before us, or somehow.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah. So, but
I didn't say we're
what's
primary.
the evidence of this source? Like, I would like to see some. This is. It sounds great. It's kind of new age. It's cool, but I'm so skeptical, because I guess I should explain. I'm a physicalist, so I'm on the other side of this. So obviously I don't understand.
Well, in 2018. I mentioned for a half century, I'd been trying to understand the nature of reality as a researcher, but I was still working with a physical framework. I thought there's just maybe some other dimensions, some other type of particle, some type of energies. I was looking for other ways to explain it and incorporate it within our paradigm, until again, I had that experience where they connected. I have so little time here tonight to present the most powerful ideas in human civilization to you, in fairness. And if you really want to go deep, you're welcome to read my book, and then afterwards engage in private dialogue with me. You're welcome to.
Yeah, it's
what I said about physics, I just skimmed the surface. What I'm saying is so leading edge, so authenticated by the leading physicists. That's the fact. And what you call science is degenerated. Excuse me.
I'm tempted to say hubris here, to think that you're out-thinking all the smart physicists and all that So anyway, but
no,
I'd say the positive.
I said I've connected the dots. Well, so my book is replete with references. I've tried to give you some examples with quotations this evening. I'm not claiming this is my unique discovery. I've just saw how it all connects. You asked for proof. I've seen how that comes together in a coherent whole. You refer to science, but you don't understand what's happened to science and degenerated to scientism. I cover that in my book as well. Scientism is a dogmatic belief. It's the contrary of what science is supposed to be, about testing things out.
Yeah, science
it assumes, it doesn't test out.
Yeah, I would argue science is not dogmatic. But anyway, we're on the opposite sides of the coin here, so I'll
okay, thank you, David. And also, let's remind ourselves that this is called the Free Thinkers Institute, which means we're supposed to be open-minded, and there's people on both sides, and we should all at least entertain the possibility of anything and not be completely closed about anything. So That's what I would suggest for everyone to do, to just at least listen. And if you want to pursue it further, if it's intriguing, go for it. If you're not, it's up to you. We're all free creatures. Jose, you're up.
Yes, thank you. I was just listening to an audio a few days ago about this guy about argumentation, and he said the most important skill in argumentation is to know how to disagree and where it is that we disagree sometimes. I wouldn't issue an opinion on what I heard because I feel like I don't know enough. So I will have to read your book, Howard, before I can even formulate an opinion. What I would like to do is go beyond the debate, meaning assume for a moment that we could be 100 people, 1,000, 1,000,000 people, accept everything that you said. In what way would behavior of these people change? How would we
Thank
be
you for this
different?
question. I thank you for this question because I haven't said it yet. It's the reason I wrote my book. I'm extremely concerned about the breakdown of our world. I can't exaggerate enough the perilous condition we're in, the mess we're in, and we're so going in the wrong direction and deluding ourselves. I wrote it as a wake-up call. I wanted people to understand the truer truth and live a better life. Fundamentally, coming back to your question, as I said, all of the science is showing us that the more correct picture of the universe, of the world more broadly, is one of non-duality, all one, oneness of the allness. What does that mean by contrast to what we have now in our current flawed understanding of reality? Right now, we're into individualism, ego, competition, exploitation, conflict. If we all had this understanding more fundamentally, that we all come from the same source, that fundamentally we have common interests, that we not only would have more peace if we lived harmoniously, but if we also worked more collaboratively, we would do more good in this level of our world. So I think it would make a fundamental difference. I don't think we could have the prejudice, the wars, and the raping of our environment when we felt connected to all of this and everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mike? Are you there? Yep.
This is extremely enlightening. Maybe you said this already, Howard, but there's a concept of complexity theory that even simple rules or matter, when taken in a complex array, has emergent properties. And so there are people who talked about consciousness, and even reality is an emergent property with that. Do you have any comments about that, or have you made comments about that in your book?
Yes, because again, conventional thinking and stale in Western science is that consciousness is an emergent property of the complexity of the physical brain. But what I point out is it's only a theory. There's no proof of it. And there's not even universal agreement or broad agreement on a theory to explain that. It's just an assumption. So if you recall, when I came to my conclusion, one of the factors I used in my conclusion, I went quickly, I should go back to it, is Occam's razor, the principle of parsimony. The least assumptions are usually, the safest position to make a judgment call on. So the more you're speculating and assuming things, the less likely it is to be fully accurate. Oh, I'm doing the opposite. I'm not making assumptions. I'm questioning and challenging those assumptions.
There are situations where even wrong rules, when sent through the filter of a complex situation, can yield adaptive behavior that leads to a good conclusion. Is that applicable to some of the things we've talked about?
Yes. And then, as we're approaching now with our Western technology, AI, artificial intelligence, and saying things like ChatGPT just moving at such an incredible pace of complexity. There's now, as you may know, debate going on in various quarters about, are these AI devices already conscious? And if not, will they or can they become conscious? In this understanding that everything comes from a source, and that all discoveries and all inventions come from imagination from source, if we can imagine something, it can happen. So we can more vividly enough imagine AI having conscious properties, it could happen. But we have to be very careful what we choose to invest our imagination and bring forth.
Okay, thank you.
I refer to the sorcerer's apprentice. Just because we seem to have these wonderful magical powers doesn't mean we have the wisdom to understand how to work with them properly at all.
Great. Thank you, Howard. David, go ahead.
Howard, it's a very impressive presentation, and I agree with, pretty much, I feel like we're on the same page for most, if not all of what you say or your position. I do wonder about the prescriptive nature of things, meaning getting fixing many of the problems in our world. To me, it always seems like it's all about social connection. How connected do we feel with each other? The less we feel lonely, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I forgot who it was who questioned it. In other words, I think it may have been Jose. Yes, that if many, many people take up what you are saying, what I believe is the correct way, do things change? I feel that things don't necessarily change. In other words, we're all wired in some ways. And I wonder, are there any parts of you, because you haven't said this, who also think, the more things change, the more they stay the same? And we could come to, 100% uptake, on imagination being the prime thing, and so-called reality less so. I'm not sure how things would change. Do you have any comments about that, or is this covered in what you spoke about?
I think it's covered because, as I say, the state of divisiveness and suspiciousness and antagonism and conflict and unregulated anger we have in the world is all because we think we're so separate, and we have to therefore compete with diminishing resources aggressively. And that's an illusion, but we're so controlled by it. I mean, look at the wars right now. There's 2 major wars going on in the world right now.
Right.
It's craziness what we do with each other in this assumption it doesn't matter. They're not us. They're not our people. It's not our land. Divisiveness. And right now, I'll come back to the United States. It's got toxic divisiveness. And you know that. It's toxic. What I said earlier, and I'll repeat it, there's sadly a real chance in the next several months there's going to be a civil war in the United States. Serious people are talking of it. The polarization is so extreme. The disbelief in each other's credibility is so extreme. It's even gone to the point of hatred of the others. So I don't think it would not make a difference. It would be a fundamental transformation. And there have been times in the history of humankind, human cultures, where things were more harmonious. And I'll go back in part again, even to we sometimes, we're taught, I think we're starting to look at it a little differently now, the so-called primitive indigenous cultures. Maybe they weren't so primitive. Okay, so they didn't have our sophisticated technology in the outside world, but if they could live more peaceful lives, if they could enjoy their environment, if their environments continue to be sustainable because of how they related to their environments, maybe there was some fundamental wisdom in that that is more valuable than what we think we've gained through our Western science.
Are we, Carl, are we allowed to respond, or do we have to raise our hands at all times? I
Yes,
just want to,
if you don't mind, if it's very brief, Jeannie, go ahead. But
yeah,
if you-
I mean, well, I just wanted to respond to what he, oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot his name here. Just what he's just said. I mean, I just so agree with him, what he just said. That's all I wanted to say, just respond.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Jeannie. I guess I'm next. I had two questions. One, you mentioned that there hasn't been any proof of consciousness or a solution to the heart body problem when it comes to consciousness. And I was wondering if you were if you do cover panpsychism in your book, or if you're familiar with panpsychism.
I am. I don't use the terminology, but yes, I am.
Okay. Would you agree with it, since it seems to
Yeah.
kind of align
Yes.
with what
Yes.
you're saying? Yeah. Yeah, I find
Yeah.
it very fascinating. And then the other question I had is, you mentioned fears, and my understanding of all the problems that we have in the world today is really because of the stories that we tell ourselves. So you mentioned fear, that's a big one. I believe that the Buddhists called have a concept for the three poisons of civilization, which is greed, hatred, and delusion, which all comes from the mind. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can overcome the stories and all the things that are creating all these issues.
Well, as far as the great impact the stories have on us, for me, again, it's largely, this world. I'm serious. So
Yeah.
one immediate, advice is to greatly cut back on how much proportional time we spend learning and studying and interacting with the outside world, apparently, as opposed to internally. Belief is powerful for good or bad. I say with placebos, it can heal, and people can also have weird reactions to it too, just because of what we expect.
Yeah.
So it is important, the belief structure. And right now, there is this real crisis of belief in terms of truth. Extremely. This is in my lifetime. I don't remember experiencing this. I knew there were certain countries historically at times that had propaganda, but like within the developed countries, to not even be sure anymore what's true. And that's the level we're at right now. So again, we got to pull back from assuming that the stories out there are the most important ones and the accurate ones. They're not.
Right. Would going inside be akin to meditation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even, something like what they call breath work, a very simple form of it is just to, sit and relax with and close your eyes, breathe more slowly and deeply, but focus your concentration on that. And as you slow down your breathing, this is a bit of an experiential exercise, so I'm doing it really quickly. You take a pause between your inhalation, your in-breath, and your out-breath. And then you have your up-breath, you exhale. And then you have a longer pause between your next in-breath. So, for example, I'm going to just with accounting, because that's how I sort of do it. So if you had a count in your mind of 3 on your in-breath, on your inhalation, 1, 2, 3, you then would hold it for a couple, 4 or 5 or something like that. Just say it in your mind. And then on your out breath, you want it to be slower. So it'd be, let's say, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then a longer pause before you then take your in-breath. And now in this interval between the prolonged out-breath and the new in-breath is a bit of a portal to going down to source. More so by intention, when I've been going to deep meditation. Similarly, when we have our dreams, or let me go back to our nightly sleep routine. When we are falling asleep, we go through an intermediate state of consciousness called the hypnagogic state of consciousness, like a bridge, conscious mind. and if you like, our subconscious mind. When we're coming out of sleep, awakening, it's not just like the light switch goes on. Again, if there's a transitional phase, a bridge, it's called a hypnopompic state of consciousness. We can learn to recognize these intervals, both before we fully fall asleep, where we're still somewhat conscious, but we're dissociating somewhat from the external structure around us. And the same thing when we're coming back from sleep into this structured reality. We can retain of maybe what we experience in dreams more vividly, or for some people, what they've invented. So it doesn't even have to be something terribly exotic. So just by working with breath, as I explained simply, or understand this interval that you can create by increasing the duration of it, it's in my book as well, you can start accessing this other level of awareness and wisdom. Now, I've talked a fair amount about imagination because, again, as I said, truly is the source of everything. But another thing I should mention for us on this level, I call this, as Charles Tart calls it, this is our consensual reality. So we have a consensus right now that this is our reality. And as I said, it is part of reality. It's only our part of reality. There's a much deeper part. Analogously to, you could, point to, say, an ocean wave and say that's part of the ocean. But the base of the ocean is obviously much broader, bigger, expansive than just the wave. Yet they're connected. They are still, essentially the same.
Yeah, and I know for all the doubters out here, that breath work has definitely been scientifically studied, and how it actually changes the brain waves. So nothing woo-woo there. Hunter, go ahead.
Thank you. I've got two things. One is on the idea of panpsychism, which I'm not sure about, but I've looked at it. And I suspect it wouldn't surprise me at all if you've looked at Ian McGilchrist's work.
Yes. There's a lot of convergence.
Indeed. And one of the very interesting things he points out is that the differences between us and chimps, for example, or our ancestors, are surprisingly not as much about adding capabilities to the brain. Actually, a lot of it had to do with adding things that inhibit what was already present before. And also that the corpus callosum between the brain hemispheres has actually been shrinking as humans have become more what we call intelligent, suggesting maybe, and if you could comment on this, suggesting maybe that if you start with everything, then what we're calling an increased ability to intelligently model the world and design things and so forth comes down to more sophisticatedly cutting away from a pre-existing structure rather than generating something new. And then the other point, if I can mix the other one in here, is related to your point about the wars and the extremely fast and concerning development of AI and all the other crises that seem to be pressing in at the same time. Maybe this is going a little bit off topic, but I wonder if this resonates at all, this idea that a lot of people who seem to achieve very high states of personal development or consciousness or something, they all start to say things like love is the answer. We could theoretically solve our problems if we all unify around love. And yet, clearly none of those have actually led to that outcome. And so one of the things I've wondered is if we keep misinterpreting the message of love, such that we say something like reject and cast out anything that impedes love, which sounds like it favors love because it's saying do it for the sake of love. Love is so important, but it's not actually acting out love, which would say, if you oppose love, we offer love to that too. If you're not open-minded about this, we offer love to that closed-mindedness. And if the kind of love that has this exclusionary dynamic has failed to achieve the aims that we're looking for, maybe a more radical type that is willing to accept and integrate even that which opposes love might theoretically be a better attempt at achieving the sort of harmony we're looking for.
I'm glad you brought up the subject of love. It's when I go deeply into my book. I haven't addressed it yet tonight, but I will, because I think it's actually very important. Like the song, "What the world needs now is love." You know, more love. It's the only thing the world needs more of. There are many references in the mystical teachings of the importance of love. Even the Christian Bible refers to God as love. Raymond Buck was a famous psychiatrist who had a spontaneous mystical experience. And he was a psychiatrist. He was able to write it up using a psychiatric framework, not in a dismissive way, just more appreciatively. And he said he came from this experience, this mystical experience, to the insight, for him, the revelation, that the fundamental connecting principle of the entire universe was love. When I first read that a few decades ago, I have to admit, it did not impress me. If anything, I thought a little less of his experience when he put it in such, trite terms almost. Now, since 2018, I have a whole different understanding of why what he experienced is so profoundly true. Let me come back to humans, first of all, in more conventional terms. Again, our world right now is fraught with divisiveness, competition, and anger. When, however, we choose to help somebody in some way, in a selfless way, not to just curry their favor or take advantage of them in some other way. When we do that, most of us feel good helping someone else. The doctor who developed the concept of stress, Dr. Hans Selye, found that one of the best ways for people to cope with overwhelming stress was to develop what he called more of an altruistic ego. It seems at first counterintuitive. What it means is, despite whatever difficulties and sufferings you're having, if you intentionally choose to try and help someone else, for one thing, you have an advantage, maybe you have an outside view for that person, or just they need some assistance and there's no one else around. You feel better, you feel less stress, and there's actually hormonal changes in the body which we can measure. It will be the endorphins, be the oxytocin, the so-called love hormone. So it's not just an ethical or moralistic thing, be kind, love thy neighbor. When we do it, we're in a healthier state, not just a better mood emotionally, physiologically, in a less stressed state. Now let's come back to love on a deeper level, and more spiritual, ontological level. Why would it be so important? Well, first of all, you have to remove the association we have of it as an emotion, or associating with sexuality. It's not about that. Those could be associated, but that's not at a core. At the core, love is connection. When we fall in love with someone, let's say as adults, we feel this profound attraction to the whole person, a connection. We feel like we're almost like we're a we as opposed to two me's. Many people who do feel this attraction as adults and decide to marry and want to spend the rest of their life with this person they so love and loves them. Roughly half of those marriages we now know in the West end in divorce. And that does not mean the other half are, being successful. Many people these days live together as couples, have children, and are only common law. So when they separate, it's not in the divorce statistics. I'm also a medical psychotherapist, and I know there are many women who can't leave abusive relationships because the men threaten them physically. The real reality of how many people feel a love attraction and it continues and sustains itself is a very small percentage of the total population. Why? That's the subject of my next book on ego. Because you start off when you're feeling this attraction, wanting to spend time with that person. and you feel connected, so you also want to do things and help them out in various ways. But after a while, our egos come back. The sense of separation. Why do we always have to do your way? Why can't you be more flexible? Can't you dress differently? You know, and so on. So we start now demanding and criticizing each other. We get more and more into this apparent separation state of ego, as opposed to the loving connection state. So again, I think these concepts I'm sharing with you all are fundamentally important on all levels for just, you know, well-being, for good quality relationships, and the health of our whole planet. It is not just abstract.
I agree. Jose, any thoughts?
Yes. Yes, that's a very good statement that Howard was making. And let me touch on the subject of love. Every time I've been in a meeting, a meetup, or meeting in person, when the word love comes up, everybody gets very uncomfortable. They shuffle in their chairs, they cross their legs, they cross their arms, they cough, right? And I think there's a lot of Hollywood in this conception of love, right? They think about romantic love. They cannot envision that there is a love that is basically the sincere desire for the well-being of your fellow neighbor, right? They get very uncomfortable, and they have a very restricted view of what love is about. And I once, I'm talking about romantic love, I once heard this expression, romantic love is one soul in two bodies. And I found that very inspiring. Now, I wanted to get back to an observation and then to a question. The observation is I find interesting how people demand proof. And however, at the same time, the reality, and I picked this up from a book from Jonathan Haidt about the righteousness in people, and the fact that he believed that all our decisions and beliefs have nothing to do with rationality. We just rationalize whatever we come up with. And then the point of proof is one I find interesting, because when you show proof to, in fact, the believers in some conspiracy theory or whatever, they don't accept the proof. The proof doesn't trump the belief. So then at the same time, I wonder why people demand proof on something that they cannot accept, when they have a belief that when you show them proof against it, they won't accept it either. So that confirms me that, in fact, we are not very rational overall, right? And that has to do with our subconscious development, and you know far more of that, Howard. But this is my question. My question is, when I said, assume for a moment that we accept all this, assume that we try this coat. It's a coat that is not my color, doesn't fit me, it's not my size, but I decided to try it on. And it's good for me. I become a better person, a better human, a better version of myself. Why would I say I want proof? Right? So it's a little different pivot. Pivot your mind or your point of view for a second and say, well, don't look for the proof of what the theory is being presented here. Assume the theory one day will be proved, and you accept it. And you're convinced, though, you're convinced that you will become a better man or a better woman, a better human being. You will get rid of anger, divisiveness, competition, me over you, right? Why wouldn't we accept it? And even worse, if we don't accept it, what is the answer to all that divisiveness, to all that division of, well, your side of the boat has a leak, not my side of the boat, so you're the one in trouble. I'm okay. We're all going to sink together, as you were saying. So what would it take if it's not an acceptance of a theory that has no proof, but it has tremendous benefits if you accept it? Anyway, that's the question. What else is there to help you become more human?
In a sense, that's the quest I'm on right now. I say wake people up to come back to greater awareness of the entrapment that they get into. I liked, by the way, that quote you gave about one soul, two bodies. And I'll tell you my own, which I have in my book. I define love as communion of souls. A communion of souls. Deep, deep connection.
The just to throw it out there, the idea of the two bodies goes way back actually to Aristophanes and Aristotle, and I'm not sure if Plato talked about, but they had a story about how in the past we actually used to be two bodies, one body with four arms and four legs and two heads, and that Zeus was like jealous of something and cut it in half, and we've been trying to find our soulmate ever since. We were one soul divided into two, and we've been trying to reconnect. So I thought it's a really interesting story. Romanticism, love. Oh yeah, I wanted to say something before I go back to Hunter. The idea of reality versus illusion is something that has been a survival mechanism for us in our evolution. So we need to understand that this is ingrained in us. And the reason it's ingrained in us is because when we were evolving up in the savannas, we really had to distinguish between the rustling, bush, whether it was the wind or there was a tiger that was going to eat us, right? So we've evolved with that sense that we really need to know what truth is, because it might kill us if we don't. So I think that to answer Jose's thing, like while we do need to be open-minded in the sense that there's a lot that we do know, but there's also a lot we still don't know. And there's a lot of theories out there of what could be true, but we don't know yet. And so we do need to keep trying to find out if something is true, because I think that is really the core survival as much as other things could be true. And yes, if it works for you, that's great, but maybe it might not work for you, I'm a big believer in the sense that there's a lot that we don't know. I know that the sense of not being separated and not being and being one consciousness is all but quantum mechanics. David Bohm said that there's only one consciousness.
Right.
So that makes sense to me. The sense of separation that we have today, I think comes from fears. And, to me, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is fear. So to me, I see that as the two distinctions, right? Fear is what's creating all the problems. Love is what attracts you to what is good and what makes you feel good on all levels. So there's a lot to do, but I still think it's all mental, right? It's all something that we could work towards.
Yeah.
With that said, let me go to, actually, Hunter, if you don't mind, if I could go to Will since he hasn't spoken yet. Will, do you want to go ahead, or do you want to refer to Hunter first?
No, Hunter can go.
Okay, go ahead, Hunter, and then Will.
Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned briefly epigenetics, and I have only the vaguest sort of, I've heard like the rumors that we're taking that scientifically more seriously. I'd love if you got one or two like impressive sort of findings or tidbits that are like really demonstrate why we're taking that more seriously. And then I wonder if you have any thoughts about, you mentioned the mind's effect potentially to alter the genome, to activate or deactivate genes.
Well, that's epigenetics, yeah.
Yeah. Well, is it just the mind though? Do you have any thoughts about it being any deeper than you think the thought or whatever, and it happens? Or are there deeper processes in the body that need to connect, the mere mental thoughts with the deeper physical processes that are theoretically going on here? And theoretically, you could pass these genetic changes on to your children if they happened, if you procreated after making these changes. Is that all? Does that make sense?
You're covering a big territory there, in that. So back to part of your question about epigenetics, to give you an illustration of how the mind and the physical body have some interface, that it comes out that way. So at Harvard Medical School, quite a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago, they did some research with first-time meditators. So it was the first time they ever had a session of meditation, and they would take a blood sample, sort of before and after in control groups and so on. And what they found, and this is again 10, 15 years ago, so I don't remember the exact time frame, that from just one single session of meditation and someone who's untrained as a meditator, the genetic expression of over 100 genes was changed fundamentally in a very short period of time, one session. In things like psychedelic therapy right now, in psychiatry, one of the leading edge, still controversial, but increasingly gaining traction and acceptability, treatments for PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is psychedelic facilitated psychotherapy, because it resets the brain and it causes, again, changes that we call, again, neuroplasticity in the neurons and the wiring connections between the neurons. The reason, in part, that it's become, more of a thing in the news, if you like, which is part of your question, is because of the MRI technology. We now, can see things in brain activity and helping us understand the structure that we didn't understand before. So we can correlate certain things going on in the brain with also certain genetic changes in the expression, again, of the genes. As far as it, being then something you convey to your ancestors, that's a whole other thing. When I talk about epigenetics right now, the way I'm talking about it, it's like modifying the on-off switches, as I said. We call it the gene expression. So it's not that you've changed the whole physical gene in such a way that now your child, will have that different version. It's just like with a computer, right? You set things separately, right? As your own user of your own computer, you may have your own, preferred settings for various things.
So it's more like they get the same genes, and then the fact that you've activated some of them doesn't mean they arrive activated in the child.
That's right.
So that's to go through
That's
the
right.
same process.
Mhm.
I see.
Yeah, and there's a lot of science on all that, on epigenetics for sure. So that I'm aware of. Thank you. Will, go ahead.
Thanks, Carl. I was just thinking of when you said there's a lot we don't understand. You think there's a lot we don't understand, but I think there's one thing we can never understand. And I saw a professor of physics at Oxford University talking about this recently on a YouTube clip. And he said that the laws of physics cannot invent themselves. So we only have two options as far as I see it. Well, obviously, something existed infinitely without first cause. So far, all we know is the Big Bang, 14 billion years ago. So the energy that created the Big Bang, it either emerged from nowhere, it just came from nowhere and created a known universe that's 90 billion light years wide, or alternatively, it existed infinitely without cause. And most physicists, when pushed on the question, go to the infinite existence without first cause, because I think that relates to Einstein. Apparently, he proved that energy could be displaced. Energy could be displaced, but energy cannot be extinguished. So given that as if you accept that, then the common theory amongst physicists is that the energy that created the known universe, that's 90 billion light years wide, which is incomprehensible because it's this mouse traveling at 300,000 miles per second for 90 billion years. The energy that created that had no beginning. Now, this is beyond comprehension. And a lot of people go, oh, no, we'll work it out, because they, in the space of 8 seconds for that to course through their neurological pathways, they've determined via egotistical means that we can figure it out. And it's just demonstrative of our sort of arrogance in the face of the unknown. Yeah. And it's abundantly clear that everything we understand about the universe and we ever will is the result of cause and effect, except one thing, and that is the emergence of reality itself. So I was a very hard atheist. I absorbed, inhaled everything Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and co said. Until one day I realized, hang on a minute, they can't explain the emergence of reality itself, and no one ever can. So I just say that. And if you want to see something absolutely astonishing, look at the link I put in the chat to molecular machines, what's happening inside every cell of your body every second of the day for your entire life. I put it in the chat. It's one of the most phenomenal things you could possibly comprehend. Thanks very much. Thanks for the discussion.
Thank you. Good points.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, actually, I think there's a name for that. Actually, oddly enough, in atheist circles, this whole idea of cause and effect, which I think somebody mentioned that a little daughter who asked, where does everybody come from? And say, well, God created this. And then the next question was, well, who created God? And so on and so on and so on. So you can keep going on and on, but eventually you're going to run out of, if you still believe in the cause and effect, which most people do, it's very intuitive. It kind of blows your mind. Nobody can really fathom how something could have existed in infinity. So yeah, it's still mind blowing. Anyway, I don't know if you have do we have any answers for the source being eternal, I guess? David.
Yeah, you just said what I was going to say. I was going to just say, if it's eternal, then you don't have to have a producer of the eternal. The eternal is just the eternal. It's a brute fact. It's, the universe has always existed. So so let's try to figure out how it works. And I think that's what Howard's trying to do. And what all of us being here in a philosophy group means we all have an interest in coming up with a model of reality that we think accurately portrays our environment. So that's why we're all here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To me, that it's a brute fact. I get what you mean, David, but it's like an easy way out. It's like, it's just a brute fact. But
it's the only way out. Because what else can you say? I mean, the universe.
But it can put perspective in your life to realize that we are in a reality which no one will ever understand the emergence of. So I don't like it personally. When I'm not upset, I'm not going to start screaming. People go, it's just a brute fact. Don't look there, it's just a brute fact. We'll never work it out. It's the biggest mystery possibly you could ever have, but don't look at it. It's just a brute fact. I get that annoys me, but anyway.
But
what else can? Oh, sorry. Well, you want to? I mean, all I can say is what else can you say? I mean, you have to be. I guess you have to be. You have to be satisfied with the idea that the universe exists, and then we come along and have to try to understand it. And if I say, well, the universe exists, it's a brute fact, and now we have to understand it. For some people, that's okay. Perhaps for you, Will, you say, "Oh no, that doesn't really answer the question."
Well, the answer really is as far as you know. In other words, you say, "Well, nobody's going to ever understand reality." Well,
I don't say that. Will said
no,
that.
I'm talking about Will.
Okay.
Well, as far as you know, I mean, whenever we talk about reality and stuff, everybody mentions the Matrix. There's no way to know that we're not in a simulation. But imagine if you were Keanu Reeves and you thought, well, this is reality. And then somebody saved you and disconnected you. And now you know, wow, well, now you know, right? But until then, you don't know. But that's what we keep doing. We do have those brains that are curious and we ask questions. And we just keep trying to find out, which is our natural drive, I think. And it's a beautiful thing because it is probably the most ingrained drive we have, which is the need to know, So
and we may eventually actually have a very clear picture of how it all works. I mean, I don't think there's any reason we won't.
Yeah,
maybe
I think one of the founder of quantum physics said, if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics.
Yeah, but he was a real card.
And I'd say that, like you're saying that we can work it out. To me, it's really interesting when people have, to me, it's demonstrative of a certain psychological trait that many of us have without being able to actually, it's like some people are colorblind or tone deaf. They can't hear the note. and they can't see the color. And I think conceptually, you can have like a conceptual blindness where you can't really appreciate how inexplicable it is. It's incomprehensible how incomprehensible it is. I'll leave it there anyway. No point.
Yeah, I mean, you might be right, Will, but you might be wrong. I mean, we may actually figure it out. I mean, all I'm saying is we might be able to figure it out. I'm not saying 100% we will, but we might.
Well, whenever somebody mentions blinders, I say, well, blinders equals closed-minded. No blinders even means open-minded, and open-minded means being curious and keep exploring. So,
but how open-minded do we have to be, Carl? That's the question.
There's no limit to our open-mindedness.
But then you're allowing a lot of, like, you can't spend time wading through ridiculous ideas your whole life. You've got to kind of whittle it down.
But David, ridiculous ideas is a judgment you're making. It's a subjective.
Well, I mean, okay, let's spend an evening talking about how unicorns run the universe. Okay, is that a waste of time?
No, well, we don't know. Maybe they are, but as far as you know they don't exist.
I think it would be a waste of time, personally.
Okay. And then what would happen if they actually did show up? If somebody did actually find one, would you go, "Oh my God"?
Oh my! I'd be sent to hell, I guess.
Oh, there's no hell. Okay,
Carl,
we have James waiting.
Carl?
Yeah.
Check?
Yeah. Go ahead, Howard.
Because
thanks, Howard.
We're just, going down a rabbit hole here, in part. I want to make a comment first of all to challenge that everything's cause and effect. There's something called the principle of synchronicity, developed by a physicist, Bauman, in conjunction with Pauli. It looks at a very different model of reality where things are meaningfully co-occurring, but you cannot explain it in any way as cause and effect. And yet it happens in life, and it's not an uncommon experience if people are open to it. Another thing I just trying to go back to science and fact and not speculations, back to parapsychology, and some of the research they now do on what we call psychokinesis, sometimes called PK, which is like mind over matter. So, for example, in some other laboratories, like one of them is a famous one, is Institute of Noetic Sciences in California, was founded by the former lunar astronaut Edgar Mitchell, almost a half century ago. In those experiments, they have an individual with sensors connected and so on in a shielded room, asked to project a force into another location to affect measurement devices or physical objects. And it's doable, it's replicable. Cause effect, there's no energy. There's nothing that blocks it. Distance doesn't make a difference. We don't have to get totally in speculation. There's a lot of pure evidence of the power of consciousness directly to manifest, to change the physical reality, as opposed to being a result of it. In my book, as I said, I actually give some exercises within minutes. Some of you can start playing with changing your experience of reality.
Great. Thank you, Howard. James, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Howard. I enjoyed the talk, and I love the references to physicists and Alan Watts and things like that. And I really agree with it, with that stuff. But and I'm still, dabbling with different philosophies. That like Spinoza is an interesting philosopher Einstein agreed with, and but this idea of so do you agree with that the universe is necessary and our existence is necessary? The idea that there's no contingency, is that related to what you just mentioned, synchronicity and so forth?
Well, in terms of necessity, as I tried to explain, if source, which people previously would have referred to as God, has absolute knowledge and absolute power in the world, why would it bother to create the rest of the universe, humans or anything else? And as I try to explain, the source is pure consciousness. And let's keep in mind, our words, are pointers. It's not the territory. The map's not the territory, right? So it's awkward with words. In fact, mystics often say that the mystical experience is ineffable. That's a classic way of putting it. It cannot be put in words. I think it is possible. That's what I've done with my book, but it's not easy. And even as I try to condense some of these things, right now for you as well, to make it sensible to you, it's hard to explain it. I mention again, there are many, many podcasts on my website. They're free, that are extensive interviews going much deeper into these various subjects than I can possibly address here tonight.
Great. Yeah. There's a lot of information on the chat. Please follow up on that. Please save the chat. Hunter, and then David.
The discussion a couple of minutes ago reminded me of a couple of Richard Dawkins quotes. One is, we need to be open-minded, but not so open-minded that our brains fall out. There's one David likes. And the other one,
I like that. I like that. I like that.
The other one is that he doesn't know if we'll find all the answers and be able to comprehend every part of the whole universe and the history of everything, and that'll be incredible. Or if we'll just keep finding new things and we'll never come to the complete answer. And he doesn't know which possibility he finds more appealing. But I've become quite sympathetic to the idea that you can't really know pretty much anything. Howard, you made reference to kind of like the Buddhist idea, there is an experience. In the West, we say cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And then the Buddhist perspective says you're being too ambitious. You don't even know what I is. You're putting in these
That's right.
ideas.
I agree.
There's
Yep,
just an
I agree.
experience. And I don't even
Mhm.
know if the past happened or if the future will happen or if any of my
Mhm.
concepts are real, any of this. I don't know if I'm
Mhm.
in the matrix. I mean, even if I do have the experience of waking up, I mean, isn't this, I haven't seen the other Matrix movies, but isn't the premise in the later movies that, you wake up in the real world and that's not the real world either. It's just another simulation.
I used to teach course at University of Toronto many years ago on these notions in a much more basic version because I didn't yet have the understanding I do now. And one of the homework assignments I gave my students as an experiential one was to work with lucid dreaming. So in lucid dreaming, we also call it dream programming, or historically for thousands of years in India, dream yoga. It's the ability to learn to become conscious in a dream that you're dreaming without awakening completely. And then because you're somewhat awake in the dream, realizing it's a dream and your dream, you can then choose to change the dream. Whether it's to invent something literally, or to conquer some, emotional demon in your life and confront it and deal with it. It's very real, and it's not a difficult thing for people to learn. In my class, I gave my students the assignment to start by having a notepad by their bed. And when they would wake up in the morning, as soon as they woke up, before they would get out of bed, before they would get dressed, pick up the notepad, write down any fragments of whatever dreams may have come into your mind. That was just the first part of the assignment before they're starting to control dreams. But back to your question, this is interesting, I think. Next class, one of the students raises their hands and says, I followed your instruction. I had a pad beside my bed. I had a vivid dream. I remembered what you said before we get up, write it down. And then I woke up in the morning and the pad was blank. So it was a dream within the dream.
Yeah. And, even if we build all technology and colonize the universe and it becomes the heat death, and it seems like everything we try, it all works. And even that, theoretically, we wouldn't know if there was something outside of our experience that made it so that what we thought we knew, we didn't really know. And you could even imagine a thought experiment. You could go to heaven and God could say, yes, it was whatever the religion was. You were right, and here you are, and have a great time. It's 1 trillion years later, only for you to wake up in the Matrix pod and be like, you never could really know anything. So I wonder if we skip,
except that you're aware of being aware. As I say, the only thing.
Yeah, right. And then I sometimes wonder, like, I mean, I could be so confused. Do I even know that? But it seems like probably I know that, but that doesn't get me very far.
Right.
And so the question I start to wonder about is, it almost doesn't matter how we reconcile physics and all of this. It's like, no matter what we find out, and no matter how it seems to work technologically or in any way, literally you can imagine, you still come up ultimately against the ultimate unknowability of existence. And it's
On that level, yes, but on, you know, this consensual reality we're in
conventional
right now, things are not going well. We so don't understand
yeah.
how to relate with each other as, you know, humankind, or to have a sustainable environment. To a critical point.
Right.
It's not academic.
So,
by the way, I'm just putting in the link to my website that has the podcast in the chat, if any of you are interested.
Thank you very much.
So what I wonder is, and I wonder if this is even like an existential burden that even the most intelligent, like alien or future version of us or AI, like literally no matter how smart you get, maybe you are ultimately in the same basket. God himself would ultimately be in the same basket. And if it is a necessary feature of existence that you ultimately don't know anything, except maybe that there is some experience in a given moment, then the question is, we've pulled the rug of justifiability out from under any possible decision procedure. Like, I can think like, oh, it would make sense. It's reasonable to walk across a floor and pick up a cup. And it's like, well, look, conventionally go for it. But you can't ultimately know even that. Like, so then how do you do it? How do you do it, given that there is literally not even the slightest possibility of justifying
if you
that
remember,
being a good idea?
As I said, quantum mechanics go back to that level of it, you know, suggest the nature of the physical reality is probabilistic. So you can have a, you know, a probable expectation based on your experience or other sources of information or people you trust, but it's only probabilistic. It's not absolute. But it doesn't mean it doesn't count. There's you know, degrees of probability.
Yeah.
I mean, are there?
Yeah.
Can we actually justify?
Yes.
I mean,
We have a
it's
whole
it's
history. We have
the
a
only thing
history
that
of memories, and we have books, and we have scientists,
Yeah.
but I can't prove any of that right now. I don't have access to any of that. Does even the probability withstand this level of our inability to justify our beliefs?
I think it's the only thing that's keeping us sane, Hunter. I mean, if you really spend the time to really think about that at that level, you would go crazy. And in fact, a lot of people go crazy.
Would you?
True.
I wonder
Anyway,
if
here we are.
We need to move on to David and Sean real quick because we only have 8 minutes left.
All right then.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
I just have two, in answer to Hunter's extreme skepticism, I would argue he should be skeptical about his skepticism, and that'll, you know, in other words, that'll save you from being.
Oh, I am, but it doesn't save anything.
I
It
think it's
should.
the opposite. I think you're
It
adding
should.
another layer of hell for
No. It should attenuate your extreme skepticism to a more moderate level.
Okay.
I mean, you know, look at David Hume. He was skeptical about causation, but he had no alternative explanation for how the world worked. He just said, you know, all we know is correlation. We don't really know that there's interaction, right? That was Hume's, one of his points, which is a pretty smart point, but he didn't come up with any alternative. So I still hold causation is the way it works. But actually, what I wanted to talk about is the paranormal. And there's a fellow called James Randi. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with him. He's a Canadian American.
I love James Randi. Yes.
Yeah.
His educational foundation. I believe he still has the challenge in there since the $1
million for any psychic or paranormal person who could, under controlled situations, demonstrate anything. And he was hoping somebody would come along and be able to show it, but he was skeptical, of course, and nobody's ever claimed $1 million. He was a philosopher, a skeptic, and he was also a magician. So he knew how to deceive and make things that were actually quite normally done, make them look magical. So anyway, that's just my take on paranormal. I'm very skeptical about
Yeah,
paranormal.
but hold
I'm
on,
not too. I'm not too skeptical. I'm just the right amount of skeptical.
Nothing wrong with being skeptical.
if that was a criteria for, is there real provable data in the realm of parapsychology, why would the US government for almost 25 years, through multiple defense and intelligence agencies, fund Stargate?
Well,
And
they want
why
to
was
cover
it actionable
themselves, just in
intelligence for
case.
several hundred international missions?
I don't know about all the several hundred missions, but they want, of course they want to cover all their bases. They're curious.
Yeah,
So
we're
they
open-
try, but they won't come up with anything paranormal.
Who didn't? Excuse me, who
Nobody's
didn't?
come up with it yet.
well, as
You
far
don't
as
know the
I know,
literature. You're so wrong. I just quoted you a couple of statistics earlier today.
as
My
far
book
as-
has more
Wrong.
of them.
You could
You're
say that
absolutely
I
wrong
may
on
be
this.
wrong or I may be
No,
right.
no.
You can't say
No,
I'm so wrong.
Yeah.
You
Well,
just
there's a
said
lot
there's
of stuff,
none. Excuse me. You said there's no evidence for it. I've been involved in it for more than 50 years. I know many of the parapsychologists personally. I have done experiments myself. I was awarded the first degree from a university in Canada for my research on telepathy, which was extremely successful. And I did it in the most critical, skeptical department there was at McGill. The
I
head at
know.
the time was
And
D.O.
now
Hebb.
there's courses
Excuse
at
me,
university
will you let me speak
telepathy.
for a moment?
David,
Is that
let
true?
him finish. Let him finish.
All right, but come on.
And Professor D.O. Hebb at one point was the president of the American Psychological Association, also became chancellor of McGill University, in addition to being departmental head. But back around the 1950s or so, he had written in one of the American Psychological Association journals that he rejected all of the evidence for parapsychological research because it was a priori impossible. That's where I chose to do my research. And I proved him wrong. And he admitted it subsequently.
You should really go pick up your $1 million.
He's a hard skeptic.
That's why there's all sorts of courses on how to do mental telepathy. I mean, come on.
Okay, David. I mean, we got to get to a point where, if you're curious about the
Yeah,
evidence,
but he's saying there's telepathy.
right? But David,
Come
there's
on.
been a lot of stuff we didn't believe before, and then it was study, and then there was proof, and then people changed their minds. So my point to you, David, is as much as I'm a skeptic as well, that you got to be open to whatever evidence is mentioned. If you don't believe the evidence, then pursue it deeper, but don't discount it just because you think it's magical.
Well,
So
if
should really go
anyone-
pick
if
up his $1
anyone
million.
here can do it. I mean,
Yeah.
if Howard could read my mind right now, then like if anyone can read minds, I would like to know about it.
Well, then that could be tested if that's the case.
But
anyway,
it should be common knowledge. If it's true, it should be common knowledge. Everyone would want to know.
maybe, yeah.
Come on.
Anyway, Sean, real quick, if you can keep it under 30 seconds, and then ER as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll try to make this real quick. Thanks really for your for speaking with us, Howard. Appreciate all the insights you've given.
Thank you.
I'll definitely
Thank
do
you.
some more digging as well myself and validate some of the claims that you've made here, because like everyone's saying, have a critical mind
You're welcome
and
to.
review all the information. I think that's something we all lack the initiative on these days, especially with all the information and misinformation that we encounter on the internet. My question to you is actually regarding the psychotherapy that you mentioned earlier, with regards to with LSD and other types of psychotic drugs. So before everyone here goes and starts taking LSD and cannabis and psilocybin, can you maybe relate the meditation to re-enter the cave, as you said it earlier? Can you maybe present the benefit that people could see from psychedelic assisted psychotherapy as a means of facilitating philosophical insight and personal transformation? And if so, how might this relate to the idea of re-entering the cave as you presented it with the allegory of the cave?
Well, first, absolutely, it can be a source of profound enlightenment and knowledge and wisdom. As far as how it relates, I know we're tight on time now, to going back into the cave. When somebody is under the influence of some of these psychedelic medications, we sometimes use the expression that they're in a state-dependent learning situation. I'll use actually a simpler example, alcoholism. When some people have a few too many drinks, they may say and do things, and it seems they're fully conscious of what they're doing. They may seem intoxicated, but they're still saying like they know what they're doing and they're doing it by intention. And then after they maybe pass out, wake up, they blank out. They have no memory of it. Or musicians might be having a jam session with marijuana, and they suddenly are developing a real riff that has real, really catchiness to it. And they plan to write it down and then actually, do a recording of it. But when they're now coming back to their normal state of consciousness, they no longer experience it as being so attractive and harmonious and so on. So those are examples where you're changing state of consciousness, you're changing your experience of reality.
Okay, great. Very briefly, ER, do you have a comment? ER?
I think it's me.
Yeah.
I'm a member of Rhine Research Institute for many years, and I really love this presentation. I think it's amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to
Thank you.
David, I also like always listening to your points at various hundreds, thousands of meetups. And I also like what you say, but it's not a time to disagree now. It's a different meetup. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Jeannie?
Yeah, I just want to say, Carl, how wonderful, what a wonderful evening. And Howard's presentation is just phenomenal meeting today. I just want to thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think we could all give virtual applause to Howard for his time. Please read the book. I'm actually very, very eager to read your following book on ego. Talk to Garrett if you would like to come back and expand on things. But yeah, we really appreciate all the thoughts. This has been a lot of stuff to think about, so I would definitely urge all the skeptics out here. Again, this is the Free Thinker Institute, and part of being a free thinker is to be open-minded. I think Howard has a lot of credentials that would at least make us give pause and at least pursue it. I don't think our brains will fall off by at least entertaining all these thoughts. Thank you again. Let me end with whenever anybody mentions Descartes, and I think therefore I always like to mention this really cute joke. Descartes was having dinner at a restaurant, and the waiter after the meal said, "Would you like some dessert?" And Descartes said, "I think not," and poof, he disappeared. Anyway, have a great night. Make sure you save the chat, and I will see you next time. Take care.
Yes. Okay. Are you going to be back
Thank you all.
next week?
Yes. I'll be here next week. All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.